MSTE. I will also be moving into the new grants office in a few days. That will be set up soon. Also joining me on this meeting, Donna Gunning is on the call. Justin Dayhoff is here also from the MSDE. And if there are any specific questions about your non-public school status, we also have Scott Edwards on the line, who is a non-public school approval specialist. I believe Alexandra Canberra is here too. And Luke Tortlat, I think, is here also. There's a lot of names, so I can't scroll through them all. So I have a lot of colleagues here who are ready and able to answer questions if any come up. Okay. This session is being recorded, and as the previous session that was offered on January 24th, a recording of this session will be posted on our Maryland EANS website if you have any colleagues that miss today's session. A quick reminder that our Maryland EANS website has a lot of information on it. A lot of that information will be shared with today during this session. And I'm going to put the link right there in the chat for anyone to reference. You may have questions that come up throughout this presentation. Feel free to type them in the chat box. And please, if you could, don't private message them to me or any one specific person if you can avoid that. My colleagues will be also monitoring the chat and alerting me of questions that come up, so they can see those questions too if you send them to everyone. All right, so let's get started. Okay. Okay. This technical assistance meeting is for the EANS program, Emergency Assistance in Non-Public Schools. That's why you're all here. And here's an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll talk about what the program is. What is EANS 1? Where's the funding coming from? We'll go over the timeline for application submission, review process, and the procurement or reimbursement of funds. We'll go over eligibility requirements, use of funds, allowable use of funds. We'll also talk about the payment processing and procurement. We use the word payment here mainly to refer to any reimbursable items that fall between this very specific timeline between March 12th and June 27th of 2021. We'll talk about that at that slide. But this program is very unique in that any requests for future use will be procured by the MSDE. We are not providing funds right now for future purchases. Everything will be procured at the state level. We'll also go over the documentation you need to assemble before you submit your application. We'll also talk about SVI, which is the Social Vulnerability Index that's referenced in our guidelines. We'll also get a preview of the application, and then we'll save some time at the end for any questions you have. So what is EANS? EANS is the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools program. And the purpose of EANS is really to support the safe opening and operating costs of non-public schools and the students you serve during the pandemic. Funding for this is coming from CRSA, the Coronavirus Response and Supplemental Appropriations Act that was passed last year, 2021. And from those funds, every governor was given funds from the GEAR Fund, and Governor Hogan appropriated some of those funds for the EANS program. Any funds that are not expended or allocated during this grant fund cycle will be reverted back to the GEAR fund. Right now, we have an allocation of around $35 million and $200,000 for administration of the program. Here is the timeline for the program as we are right now, sort of nearing towards the end of the application period. The application opened on January 21st. The first customer support session was held January 24th. The recording of that is on our website. And then today is our second session. It's February 1st. Applications are due by midnight in just 3 days, on February 4th, at which point the MSTE will begin processing all of the applications for request for funding, that is our procurement of services and assistance and reimbursement of funds that fall within that specific date range. We'll also determine the scope of work for all of the requests that we've received. Around April, we'll go to the Board of Public Works. We'll be working with them directly and working with vendors who are state approved. So we'll procure contracts and assistance for non-public schools, and that will be handled directly through the state. End of spring, around April or May, is when administration of services and assistance that we've procured will begin. At that point, any unused funds will revert back to the GEAR fund. We've gotten this question a lot about when should I schedule or calculate the requests for procurement services or assistance, and September 2023 is when schools can maintain use of that service or assistance that we've procured. And then beginning in October, the state will begin the process of retrieving any service or assistance that has been delivered to the non-public schools.
And I just want to echo, so one of the other questions that we've had, particularly related to the timeline, is it's associated primarily with the final date, the due date for the timeline. We've had a couple of questions requesting an extension, and this is the reason why in December we noted the necessarily brief window. And I just want to be really clear here again today why exactly that application window, this timeline here, is the way it is. And to be clear, MSTE, because like Nicole mentioned, right, no funds are actually awarded as part of the EANS program. Only services and assistance or reimbursement for services and assistance are provided, at which point the State Department of Education retains title and ownership of those services and assistance. That means, as a result of that, and because we will be procuring services and assistance based on what we receive in the application, we, the agency, cannot determine the total amount of service and assistance until all applications are received. Once that happens, once all applications are in, we review the requests in total to determine whether and to what extent, with the available funds, we can provide and procure the requested services and assistance. Again, we have to do that holistically. We have to see what people request in order for us to determine which vendors we will be needing to procure with. There are some that we may need to procure with. There are some that we may not. We can't, though, begin that process of procurement until we identify what the total scopes of requests are, because we will need, when we go to the Board of Public Works, to have those scoped out contracts for approval. And contracts and vendors are not final until the Board of Public Works approves them, which is the other reason why we cannot necessarily release preemptively a list of vendors, right? Because no vendor list will be final until we complete the process. So just to be clear there, again, we won't be able to offer any extensions or late submissions because we have to begin this work immediately in order to take all of the information, roll it up, identify the scope of work tied to the various services and assistance that we are able to offer, make sure that tie those back to the vendors and the contracts that we're going to use to administer those, and move those to the Board of Public Works agenda. So I just wanted to be really clear about that today.
Thank you, Justin. Regarding eligibility, non-public schools are eligible to apply for funding if they meet the state definition of elementary and secondary education, comply with the definition of what an elementary school is. And another caveat is that non-public schools did not and will not apply for and receive a PPP loan or Paycheck Protection Program loan on or after December 27th, 2020. If you applied for a loan and didn't receive funds, you're still eligible to apply for EANS funding. If you applied for and received a PPP loan before that date, you're still eligible too. Regarding status, non-public schools are eligible to apply if you're authorized or registered to operate in Maryland, have been operating since and open prior to March 13th, 2020, and is not a standalone preschool. If your school serves pre-K through 5th grade, and there are pre-K students who will benefit from your request for assistance or service, that is fine as long as you meet the other regulatory requirements, but standalone preschools are not eligible to apply for funding. Here is a portion of the allowable use of funds, services or assistance or reimbursement of the following areas. So I won't read this out loud to you. These are also posted on our website. They're also on our grant guideline document. And they are a part of the funding worksheet through which schools make their funding requests. There have been some questions regarding technology, HVAC units, and some of those questions are answered specifically, are called out and answered specifically through the United States Department of Education's FAQ. They have their own 31-page FAQ document. They've been very explicit in answering those questions. Regarding any major building renovations or improving ventilation systems, HVAC, the caveat here is that the state must be able to retrieve those items by the end of the period without any major renovation costs. So this is something that you should consider when you're making your request, if it falls in that area. This is another synopsis of that process that Justin referred to a few minutes ago. Just a reminder that our application closes on February 4th, midnight. At that point, the MSDE will review all requests for funding, all applications for eligibility and completeness, at which point we'll begin reviewing the requests for services and assistance and the scope of work for each school, and then the school system as a whole, all Maryland non-public schools. We'll go to the Board of Public Works to finalize contracts with state-approved vendors, at which time the MSDE will be in charge of procuring those services and assistance to the schools, and then schools will receive those approved services and assistance that the MSDE procured. This is a sort of a brief synopsis of the timeline that that Justin mentioned a few minutes ago. So in preparation for your application, by the way, we've already received a couple hundred applications so far, but if you haven't submitted your application yet, here are some documents that you can assemble beforehand in preparation for the completion of your application. The first item is that you'll need your school's total student enrollment data, and also your school's low-income student enrollment data. This is a requirement from the U.S. Department of Ed. Low-income students will be prioritized if the total request of funding from non-public schools exceeds the availability of funds. I'm seeing questions pop up in a bar and then disappear. So if any questions come up, okay, Justin, you're nodding yes. You'll interrupt me or answer them in the chat. Great. You'll also need, okay. You'll also need the certification form, and the funding worksheet, and an updated W-9 form. These last three forms are available on our website. At the very bottom, if you scroll down where it says resources, you can download these forms ahead of time and complete them before you open up the online application. I just want to go back for 1 second. And, oh, okay, never mind. I'll go over the funding worksheet in just a moment because there've been a lot of questions about that. But first, as I mentioned, if the total request for funding exceeds the total availability for all public schools, we'll have to use we'll be using SVI to determine which schools should be prioritized. So SVI is
just to give additional clarity there too, with regard to the origin of that requirement, that is in federal law associated with the program. We are required to prioritize schools that enroll low-income students. Also, we are required to prioritize schools that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And Nicole's going to talk about why SVI is a particularly appropriate measure for that, and why it's also helpful in terms of data collection efforts. But I just wanted to offer some additional clarification there.
So SVI is an index that is being used more and more across the U.S. It refers to the Social Vulnerability Index, or a community's ability to bounce back from potential negative effects on the community from external stresses, natural disasters, pandemics. So the SVI is calculated, it ranges on a scale from 0 to 1, and it's based on 15 key social and demographic indicators, which are highlighted here in this graphic to the right. This is available on the CDC's website, and if one of my colleagues would mind putting in the address there, the link. It's also on our next page. You can calculate your own SVI. Just to reiterate, the state will be calculating the SVI score if we need to go down that route. But non-public schools are not required to calculate their own SVI, and we'll talk about that when we get to the low-income student enrollment portion of the application. So to calculate or to see your own school's location SVI, you'll click on this link right here, and it will bring you to an interactive map. Move this down. And here in the address bar right at the top, you'll enter in the address of your school. Well, I'll use our MSDE address, West Baltimore Street. This is where the MSDE building is located. You just click in an area next to your address, and the SVI score right here is 0.28. Are there any questions about SVI that popped up in the chat? No? Okay. Okay, we'll move along to the funding worksheet. So this document's available on our Maryland EANS website. I have gotten some emails that there aren't enough lines on this worksheet. We've added lines to the bottom, so we've extended it since it was first uploaded onto our website. Additionally, if you find that there still isn't enough space for all of the requests that you want to make, you can download a fresh sheet and attach them together and upload them both as one document on the application. So this is the worksheet that non-public schools will use to communicate your funding requests. And let me see. I'm going to download it just so we can go through it together. This is what it looks like when you download the sheet from our website. Your first indicator here will be to indicate to us the priority or the urgency of that request. It would be very helpful if you put the highest priority request right at the top, so it's easy for us to identify that from all the applications we'll be receiving. Next, you'll choose what funding area your request falls under. If you're requesting partitions, for example, you'll choose letter E. There's been a couple questions about what's a service and what's an assistance. A service is a contract that is procured through the state, where services are delivered to the school. Tutoring services, for example, and an assistance is a tangible item that's procured and then delivered. You put the quantity here. Oh, it's this request for reimbursement. If you're requesting for reimbursement, you would click yes, and then at the bottom of the sheet, you can feel free to just attach any invoices or receipts or posted checks that relate to that request that you're asking for. The quantity goes here. You type up a brief description of what it is that you're asking for, and then the last column is for anticipated approximate dollar amount. Again, just want to reiterate that non-public schools are not tasked with procuring the service or assistance. You're not, yes.
We just have a question in the chat asking you
Yeah,
to.
I saw something pop up.
Okay.
The difference between the service and assistance. This I don't want applicants to get too hung up on the difference. This is not a deal breaker, but in a nutshell, service can be defined as any contractual service that is procured by the state and delivered to schools. That could be if your request is for additional tutoring services to compensate for learning loss, then we would procure the contract for those tutoring services, and that service would be delivered to the school. So in that case, it would be a service. And assistance here, you can think of that as any good or tangible item that is delivered to the schools that the schools can use. You'll type up a brief description here. Again, approximate dollar amount here just helps us at the state have an idea as a way of calculating a rough estimate as to the total amount of funding that's being requested. Schools are not tasked with finding a contract, finding a vendor, but this is just what you anticipate the total cost of that item would be. You'd fill out the form in its entirety, add lots of lines, and then your total goes here at the bottom, and then you'd upload that to your application. Oops, sorry. Okay, let's get into the online application. If you need a link to this, it's also on our Maryland EANS website. Right at the top, there's an icon that looks like a picture of our grant guidelines package, and it says apply here. You just click there and you enter into the online application. First question asks, what type of non-public school are you? I've gotten a lot of questions about this classification. A school believes that they're church exempt, so they click church exempt. The next page leads them to a list of schools, and they have to choose the name of their school. Sorry, I'm reading the questions that pop up. And then I get an email saying I'm a church exempt school, but my name is not on the list. So there are church exempt schools, private pay approved schools, which also could be based in a church, and publicly funded approved schools. So if you're not sure what type of school you are, again, feel free to email me at the Maryland EANS web email address. We also have a list of all Maryland approved non-public schools on our website, and they're classified by type. So you can also check there if you're not sure what type of school you're registered as. Here's where you'd click that drop-down menu and choose the name of your school. Enter in your information. The next section of the application talks about the eligibility requirements that we spoke about at the beginning of our meeting today. There's a citation here if you're wondering if your non-public school is registered as such. If you click yes, then you move on to the next question. Sorry. Next question asks if your non-public school is registered or approved to operate in accordance with Maryland regulations. Again, if your non-public school has existed and operated prior to March 13th, 2020, then you're eligible. That is the date that the president declared a national emergency. So if a school opened in the past couple of months, if it's a new school, you wouldn't be eligible to apply for EANS funding during this round. The next question asks about the PPP program. There are a couple of notes here that explain a little bit more about this, this eligibility item. If your non-public school applied for and did receive a PPP loan after that date, then you would check yes, and then ultimately you wouldn't be eligible for funding. Let's say you check no, and you move on to the next section of the application. It asks, so the next piece is all about your student enrollment at your school. You're asked to enter in your total student enrollment. This is for the 1920 school year, not for the current school year, the school year 2019 to 2020. And we're also required to collect the number of, or estimated number of low-income students, students that come from low-income families during that same school year. Acceptable data sources. So SBI is not on this list as acceptable data sources for non-public schools to collect their data, but you can feel free to use free and reduced public meals data. There's the farms data from Maryland is available to the public. Scholarship data that your school collects. Medical assistance data is not an acceptable data source. So these are the three measures that we're collecting for this application. We're asking you to provide the data source that you use to determine that low income qualification. And then for question 11, to enter in the percentage of students from your total enrollment that are come from low income families. And again, we'll use this information, part of the application, to determine priority of funding if the total amount exceeds what's available. The next piece asks about, asks you to check off what allowable uses of funds, what categories your funding request will fall under. And then here is that point in the application where you will upload your completed funding worksheet, name it EANS funding, and then your school name. You'll upload the file here. Again, if there aren't enough lines or you need more space, you can feel free to download an extra worksheet, attach them as one document or one PDF and upload it that way. If you're requesting for reimbursement of allowable use of items that fall within that reimbursement date, you can attach those invoices and receipts to your funding worksheet and upload everything as one big request. You'll have to designate a point of contact at the non-public school so that the MSDE can coordinate the delivery of their procured services and assistance to that person. And lastly, there are a list of assurances that all eligible schools must agree to in order to receive funding through the EANS program. The first check mark reiterates again that the MSDE is in charge of procuring those items. Therefore, we hold title and ownership to those any material or equipment or property that is purchased using EANS funds. All services and assistance under the program must be secular in nature. And please retain a copy of all records for at least 5 years. One more page of assurances. The last part of the application asks you to upload that signed certification page. It has to be signed and uploaded here, dated. And then the last piece is for schools to upload an updated W-9 form. That can be downloaded through the application on this web link. Here's what the certification page looks like. Again, you can download it right from our website. And the W-9 form is also a standard IRS document. At the end, when you reach the last page of the application, it will say, ask you, are you finished? If you're finished, click submit my application. I've gotten some questions about verification that the application has been submitted. Unfortunately, through the SurveyMonkey platform that we're using, it doesn't share the results or confirmation to the email address that you have submitted your application. But we are uploading a list of applications received on our Maryland EANS website, right at the bottom if you scroll under where it says resources. So the last time that was updated was yesterday around 3:30 p.m. So I'll be updating that again in about an hour. Okay, we'll save some time at the end for questions. Again, if you have any questions that occur to you after this meeting is over, you can send an email to the email address listed. We also have a call center available that is taking calls Monday through Saturday. Are there any questions that have come in that haven't been answered?
Yeah, happy to tackle some of these and some of the ongoing things. So again, for services going forward, which is, I'm just tackling this first because this was the most recent question. So this is tied to both reimbursement, I think, as well as the procurement of new services and assistance. So first of all, the reimbursement window for this program is March 13th, 2020 through June 27th, 2021. And we can reimburse allowable services and assistance within that window, but that's it. And that is as per guidance in the law from the U.S. Department of Education. So we are bound to that. And that's the reason for that window. That is not something that the MSDE chose. That is as per what we are allowed to reimburse. So just to be clear on that piece. As for services going forward, you can request, so we won't be making reimbursements for anything going forward, right? Because it would be outside of that window. You can, of course, request those services. So let's say, for example, you want to request cleaning services. You know, we could go about, depending on, of course, caveat that with all of the conditions and the review of applications, and the number of requests, and whether or not the full amount is expended, or you know, and those pieces. If, for example, we go ahead and so your cleaning services are going to be a part of the program for a given non-public school, we'll work to procure that contract, the cleaning contract, et cetera. The one slight exception here to some of the maintaining title and ownership, or particularly for consumables. So let's say, for example, you purchase masks. In that case, then, you know, yes, as long as those are consumed, those don't need to be returned. That being said, if at the end of the grant period you haven't used all of the masks, MSD would need to collect those back. And to ask in the case of the recent procurement for a certain subscription, you can certainly cancel that and put a request in. Again, you know, there's no guarantee because we have to go through the particular vendors that we have access to. So if this is specific or tied to a certain vendor and that vendor is not a part of the purchasing consortia or statewide contracts to which we have access, we would be unable to procure that specific subscription. So just be mindful of that, please. A couple questions came up again about just title and ownership, and particularly the window example. And so I put here in the chat, and I think it's worth reading aloud, the exact federal guidance as it relates to this question and their explanation. I think they do a really solid job of providing that. So the SRSA Act authorizes a non-public school to request services or assistance under the EANS program for this example, improving ventilation systems, including windows or portable air purification systems to ensure healthy air in the non-public school. That authority, however, is tempered by several other provisions. A separate section of the SRSA Act requires an SEA or another public agency to keep title to materials, equipment, and property purchased with EANS funds. And the public agency must administer such materials, equipment, and property. So we already talked about that. Additionally, CFR 76661 requires that equipment and supplies purchased with EANS funds must be able to be removed from a non-public school without remodeling the non-public school facility. So again, request what you're looking for, but in terms of tempering expectations here, I just want to be really clear with the interesting and, you know, in many ways difficult process for navigating what is truly a quirky law, but we certainly want to do this as best we can. I mean, I don't know that we've said it today, and I want to make sure to do that. We very much appreciate and are grateful for all that you do. And we are thankful for that work. And we recognize that this is not the easiest program to understand nor to administer. That being said, we certainly are doing our best, and we very much want to get these services and assistance out to the greatest extent possible. There's some additional language in here related to that example about windows, so do take a look at that, and we'll provide some of that in our specific guidance as well. But just to note there, but I think reimbursements and title have been the biggest questions that we've had so far. Again, though, I'm monitoring the chat now as well as the Q&A box, so if you do have any other questions. We had one question about the deadline on February 4th, so just to be clear here, it's, you know, is it midnight the end of February 4th or midnight starting February 4th? So think of it as essentially 1 minute after 11:59 p.m. on February 4th, 2022, right? So that would be the midnight that we're referring to. We also had a question about the per pupil amount in the guidance documentation as it relates to the scenarios. And just to be clear here, that is an example. That is not the final amount. We did that just to give something tangible to help understand what is necessarily a complicated program. So I just wanted to be clear why that's there. The per pupil amount, particularly for low-income students, is not $4,000. It could be. But again, we don't calculate that. We won't calculate that until we understand and can ascertain all of the requests that come in, which again is one of the reasons that the application timeline can't be moved.
Justin, you cited some federal guidance, and that is shared. I just want to direct people to where they can find that in writing. If you go down to our frequently asked questions page, the USDE's FAQ document is here. You can download a PDF and search by keyword. I find that that's very helpful. So there is a question. I think that's addressed in here, Justin. So there's a lot of questions, but I think if you search through and read, I think it's very helpful.
Yeah. So I know some people are asking about FARMS questions. You can, if you do not have FARMS, and many of you do not have FARMS data for your school. Again, ultimately we will make the calculation using SVI. As Nicole described, we do have to collect this information. We're also using this to help inform the process that we're going to be using for the upcoming EANS 2 program, which is slightly different from this. EANS 2, of course, has restrictions on and particularly targets low-income schools. It also doesn't have any reimbursement window as per federal law. So as we get ready for that, that's important information that we both need to collect according to the rules of this program, but also will help steer that. My recommendation, should you not have the 3 allowable pieces of information, would be to submit the average farms information for either your closest physical school building, public school, for which you can provide those data as a proxy. So in that case, if whatever your neighborhood school, your public neighborhood school, in the physical proximity to your non-public school, if you want to use their farms rates for this, that would be a perfectly acceptable submission for farms data. And also found the answer in the guidance, which I love to hear. So that's great validation. And we will continue to update the FAQ document with questions that come in. We want to be supportive, and do not hesitate to reach out to the email inbox. Typically, we respond within a matter of minutes, though I think I can safely make the commitment to say that we do respond the same business day. So please make sure you've got that resource. You have the call center. We want to ensure that you have what you need to get this in, right? That being said, I think.
Are there any other lingering questions in the chat or items that we should address?
Nicole, you want to scroll through one more time too, just to give a check, make sure.
I don't think so. Again, if you have any questions, there's a lot of information on our Maryland EANS website. The grant guide is here. The application is here. We upload this page daily with applications received, frequently asked questions. Some of the questions that were asked during the session may appear in that document. All of the forms that you'll need to submit your application are here also. And at the conclusion of this meeting, we'll be uploading a recording of the session for any of your colleagues that weren't able to attend.
Nicole, looks like we have a couple more questions if you want to grab those.
Let me see. Let me stop sharing my screen so I can see. Will receipts from reimbursement be required at the time of submission, or can they be provided at a later date if this assistance is approved? We're asking that all applicants submit them with their request to substantiate the amount that is being asked, for the funding amount that's being asked. You can submit them with your funding worksheet for that one question where you upload the document. You can just attach all of your invoices and receipts there. Why does this particular... Go ahead.
I can ask that. So the program, first of all, the program does not take back items. MSDE retains title and ownership the whole time. So just to be clear on that, and partly because this is not a grant. It's the federal guidance is clear. This is emergency assistance to non-public schools, and so there's a slight distinction there, right? There's no actual funding being awarded to non-public schools. It's just services and assistance. And the reason that we have to retain that title, we have to maintain that ownership, is that's in federal law. These are federal funds that came through the SRSA, like Nicole mentioned at the beginning. And that law, that federal law, requires us to maintain title and ownership. That's not a decision that we at the department have made. Absolutely.
There was a question, will tutoring or intervention services for 23-24 school year be considered, or will services end?
Yeah, well, and I just, sorry, Nicole, just to get to Brian's point and to your, I understand given the tight timeline for this application, please do not let the gathering of reimbursable receipts prohibit you, or I guess prohibit's not the right word, but stop you from submitting your application and amounts. go ahead and submit that. We request that you put those in. We will eventually need them should that request be granted. So, if you have them, please do. That being said, don't let that stop you from submitting the application. We want you to submit the application. So please do, go ahead and get those applications in. And if you need to gather and submit the receipts at a later time, once that's approved, you can do that. We do request that you do. We'd like for you to do that. We don't, however, want that to stop you from doing that.
Okay, thanks, Brian. There was a question about tutoring. Will tutoring or intervention services for 23-24 school year be considered, or will services end in October 2023? You should calculate those services to end September 2023.
And again, that deadline is not the State Department of Education's deadline. That is deadline associated with the law.
Can you send the answers that were in the chat in an email to the participants? Janet, we'll update the FAQ, the frequently asked questions document, on our webpage with some of the questions that were asked today. Can a service be procured by MSDE if it has already been delivered? I think I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So, no, I mean, if something is already delivered, that would be reimbursement, right? We can only procure something that hasn't existed yet, right? That's procurement is, I think, future tense on that one.
Okay, I think that one was answered already. Okay. I don't see any questions that were missed.
Again, this is not the end of your opportunity to answer questions and seek support, so we encourage you to continue reaching out. We are here to help. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. And again, I just want to reiterate one more time, thank you all so much for all that you do. This is quite the time, to be sure. And we know that you, just as with our traditional public schools, are facing numerous challenges. And we want to acknowledge that and just convey our gratefulness again for that. So thank you all. I do see, sorry, just got one other piece in here with regard to maintenance. And if I'm going to request, I don't want to give you the wrong answer here. If you could go ahead and send an email to the inbox for that, I would like to get that to you accordingly, and we'll also add that to the FAQ. But I don't have that answer on the tip of my tongue, and like I said, I do not want to give a bad answer here. I'd rather get you the right answer regarding maintenance or repair, particularly as it maintains to ownership. So if you could just follow up and send us an email so that we can do that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, everyone, thank you for attending. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to reach back out if you have any further questions, and we'll look forward to receiving more applications for funding. Thanks for being here, everyone.